All right, welcome back. We are looking at Knight's Tale Part 2. I'm back on the Harvard website, interlinear translation. And I've got this echo. I guess there's no getting rid of it. This is amateur hour. Anyway, last time we saw Palamon and Arcita have to part ways. They both fell in love with the same girl that they viewed from behind prison bars. Palamon saw her first. Arcita is of the opinion that that doesn't matter because he is loving her in the wrong way. And then Arcita is released from prison in Athens and exiled back to Thebes because he has a powerful um, champion who works with Theseus, who has imprisoned him to get him released. Palamon, on the other hand, is stuck in prison. So we've got this forking path. They're both in love with the same girl. The knight asked the question at the end of the first part: who has it worse? Does Palamon have it worse? Being in jail and not being able to woo his lady, but being able to see her, or does Arcita have it worse? Being free but not being able to see her at all because he's exiled. Um, Arcita thinks Palamon has it better. Palamon is like, why doesn't Arcita just get an army and come take her? He might not be thinking clearly. We've already seen the might of Theseus at the beginning, and of course Theseus is an epic Greek hero that has been stylized as a medieval duke. We've seen him with his Minotaur standard go into Thebes, and basically his army defeats Creons, which is why these gentlemen are in the state that they are to begin with. So both of these guys are kind of stuck, and this is a love affair between a girl that they haven't really even talking to, and excuse me, and these two men in this love triangle, they will not relent. So let's get into this and see how crazy this gets. Okay, 1355. When that asserted to Thebes common was, full after die he sweat and said, alas, for seeing his lady shall he never more. And shortly to conclude in all his woe, so much sorrow had never creature, that is or shall, what that the world may dure. His slave, his maid, his drink, is him berafter, that lane he wax and dry as is a shafter. His iron hollow and grisly to beholder, his hem fallow and pale as ashen colder. And solitary he was and ever alone, and wailing all the night, mocking his moan. And if he heard song or instrument, then would he weep, he meek not be stent. So feeble eke were his spirits on so low, and chanced so, that no man could know his speech nor his voice, though men it held. And in his care for all the world he felt, not only like the lover's malady of herois, but rather like many engendered of humor melancholic, beforeign in his self fantastic, and shortly turned was also up and down, both habit and eke disposition of him, this woeful lover done Arcita. Okay. This Herios on line 1374. This is a lover's malady. That has been mentioned a couple of times in medieval poetry, but has been kind of glossed over and forgotten. What I went ahead and did um, for my classes in Plan Book, I dropped a JSTOR article about this. It's about 50 pages long, so don't go too crazy learning about this. But I know of at least a couple of students who would be interested in looking at a love malady in the Middle Ages from a medicinal lens. So there's that. But that's what Chaucer's referencing here, and of course we have the melancholic humor. Um, this is medieval medicine. This is the humors. This is going back to the Romans as well and four element theory. I actually have a assignment about this for part three as it goes with astrology, so I'm not going to get too deeply into this right here. But for my class, these are the same. These are the same humors we've been dealing with. These are the same humors that, along with the astronomy, made it so that the wife could never say no, right? Um, so we're trying to explain with the science that we have love and what love does to people. And this is also a text where we have Venus showing up. So um, have we figured out love? We're still trying to figure out love today, right? So maybe we can give people in the Middle Ages a break for believing in the humors. But the melancholic humor, obviously, and this later we see this aligned with Saturn. In the front lobe, in his imagination, we'd have to get into the way they thought the brain worked to poke at this a little more, and this might be an interesting paper topic. But it's interesting that um, we're trying to explain through the body why he feels the way that he does about not being able to see this girl. Of course, we've got the sickly yellow um, hue. There's again his humor, but this is what he would look like. This is his coloration, right? Um, he's yellow humored and he's pale and cold as ashes. They believed again that you could basically diagnose a person based on what their skin looked like, and obviously this is not something that's held up, right? But you know when a person looks sick. You might not know what's wrong with them, but you know something is up. Okay, so this is his love sickness. This gets him to the point where he's actually unrecognizable, and this actually turns out to be an advantage because people can't recognize him when he decides to go back to Athens. I think of Edmond Dantes in The Count of Monte Cristo after being in the Chateau d'If for, I think it's 13 or 14 years, and afterwards kind of being a smuggler and a pirate before he finally gets to the treasure and starts to stylize himself as a count. He's completely unrecognizable to the people that betrayed him when he was a teenager, right? I mean, Edmond Dantes was one of the youngest potential captains um, at the time of the writing of the novel. Like, I think he was 18. Anyway, I digress. Um, the idea here is that his love sickness and his wasting away actually gives Arsita kind of a disguise, a natural disguise through the humors here. Okay, 1380. We've got more of this occupatio. I love that they're doing that to me. Um, what shoulder he all day of his woe indeed, when he endured had a year or two, this cruel torment on this pain and woe, at Thebes in his country as he said, upon a night in sleep as he him laid, him thought how that the winged god Mercury before him stood and bade him to be merry, his sleepy yard and hand he bar upright, and hat he weared upon his hairless breast. Okay, so some of the symbolism that goes with Mercury or Hermes. We might be more familiar with Hermes. Um, so the winged god, he has wing sandals. We should remember this. Um, we have a staff of sleep. Um, Mercury or Hermes has been identified with sleep ever since putting Argus to sleep with that boring story. And of course, Argus gets brought up in the Wife of Bath's tale. So some of the same references are being passed around here. But he thought, it seemed to him that the winged god Mercury stood before him and commanded him to be merry. His sleep-inducing staff he carried upright in his hand. He wore a hat upon his bright hair. Um, I like how hair is um, pluralized in the Middle English. So we get more into the way that Hermes is arrayed than we do some of the other information. And again, we see this occupatio, where we are saying, why should I write about this? And while saying, why should I write about this, kind of explaining it anyway, but then moving on. Common technique throughout this tale and others. Okay. Actually, here's Argus right here. Okay. 1389. Let's move on. Arrived was this gold as he took cape, as he was when that Argus took his sleep, and said him thus, to Athens shalt thou wende, there is the shapen of thy woe and ende. And with that word Arcete woke and starte, now truly, how sore that me smarte, quoth he, to Athens reeked now will I fare, nay for the dread of death shall I not spare, to say me lady that I love and serve, in her presence I reach not to starve. Okay, and here we see starve for die again. This is really common as well. Okay, so the plan here is um, he basically thinks he sees Mercury. Remember, um, this is Greco-Roman mythology that's been contemporized for the Middle Ages, and so these gods are actually going to show up, and these characters know about them. Um, we have to treat them like they're both um, 14th century English or Italian characters, and also like they're ancient figures at the same time. And it's a little interesting, but this is what we're dealing with, and this is what we do today. We contemporize old stories all the time to make them more in vogue with our modern tastes, right? Okay, so this is his dream basically, right? Um, I just want to make sure that we're not getting this wrong. Upon one night, as he laid himself in sleep, it seemed to him that the wind god Mercury stood before him and commanded him to be merry. His sleep-inducing staff he carried upright in his hand. He wore a hat upon his bright hair. So, of course, we've got the description. His god was dressed as he, Arcita, noticed, as he was when he put Argus to sleep, and said to him thus, "To Athens shall you go." So, yeah, we have the idea he thought. And my practice when I'm working with two different versions of a text, a translation and the original, is I always want to go back to the original. And if I look at 1385, we do see that he thought um, that the wind god Mercury stood before him. So the way that I am reading this is it's a dream, but we get the idea, and this is actually something that is um, disputed in Chaucer's day, and there's even a tale that gets into this. It's the nun's priest tale. We have the we have a rooster named Chanticleer who basically is debating with one of his wives whether dreams actually have significance or not. And in that particular story, um, his dream actually does have significance. There are obviously more serious stories that deal with um, a dream that actually matters or comes true, and using dreams as prophecy. And one of the most famous of these is Scipio's dream. Um, and this is kind of the model, kind of like the consolation of philosophy is the model for the ravages of fortune, right? Scipio's dream is the model for dream literature, but we see dream literature in Pearl, we see it in the Romance of the Rose, we see it in all kinds of texts that were contemporaneous to Chaucer, or that Chaucer would have known about, or even like the Romance of the Rose that he translated. So Chaucer kind of has a horse in this race. Um, he's able to have one character, of course, because of the structure of the Canterbury Tales, bring up one side of the argument, and have another character bring up another, and then we as the audience are supposed to draw our own conclusions, because Chaucer allows us to do this, unlike some of his contemporaries. So it's much more Socratic, I guess, than if we looked at, for example, Gower's Confessio Amantis, where he is kind of telling us what to think. His escape hatch, of course, is that his priest genius is a priest of Venus and not a Catholic priest. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but I digress. Okay, let's go back to 1399. This is where Arcita realizes that he looks totally different, and he could probably change his name and go back. Okay. And with that word he caught the great meal, and saw that changed was all his colour, and saw his visage all another kinder, and reeked anon it ran him in his minde, that sith his face was so disfigured, of malady the which he had endured, he meeked well if that he bare him low, live in Athens evermore unknown. And seeing his lady well need I be die. Yeah, I'm right. It's so weird, right? But that's it. And reeked anon he changed his array, and clad him as a poor labourer, and all alone, save only a squire that knew his privity and all his carts, which was disguised poverty as he was, to Athens as he gone the next way, and to the court he went upon a day, and at the gate he proffered his service, to drug and draw whatso men would devise. And shortly for this matter for to same, he fell in office with a chamberlain, the which that dwelling was with Emily, for he was wis and could soon espy of every servant which that served here. Well could he hew in wood and water bell, for he was young and meek for the nonce, and thereto he was long and big of bones, to doon that any wight can him devise. A year or two was he in this service, page of the chamber of Emily the Brigte, and Philostrate, he said that he was hete. And half so well beloved a man as he, ne was there never in court of his degree. He was so gentle of condition, that throughout all the court was his renown. They said that it were a charity that Theseus would enhance in his degree, and putted him in worshipful service, thereas he micked his virtue exercise, and thus within a wheel his name was sprung, both of his deeds and his good tongue. That Theseus had taken him so near, that of his chamber he made him a square, and gave him gold to maintain his degree, and eke men brocht him out of his country from year to year for privily his rente, but honestly and sleely he had spent that no man wondered how that he had had and 3 year in this wise his life he lade, and bar him so in pace and eken well, that there was no man that Theseus hath dare, and on this bliss did I now arsita, and speak a word of Palamon a later. Okay, so we're going to transition to Palamon. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that Chaucer is using the interlaced structure of French romances, and this is the same structure that we eventually see in Le Morte d'Arthur, because Mallory is borrowing so much from French literature, especially the Prose Tristan and the Lancelot Grail. But here's the thing. Chaucer actually went through this process in real life, but he's pulling from Boccaccio's Tessida, and we see this servant rise up and get a role in just a couple of years that it took Chaucer most of his young life to actually acquire himself. So we have this voice that's basically kind of going against maybe what Chaucer himself would have thought, but he allows this to happen because the Canterbury Tales is all about different perspectives, at least the way that I'm reading it and the way that other critics are reading it as well. So that's kind of interesting. There's a precedent for literature like this in England before Chaucer brings Boccaccio's ideas over as well. A really good example is actually King Horn. King Horn is eventually the king of England and Denmark. It's one of the oldest English language romances. And interestingly, like Horn loses everything, kind of like Arsita here, and he basically has to fulfill the role of a servant. But in his servile role, he's strong, he's tall, he's beautiful to look at. Weirdly, when he sleeps at night, like beams of light come out of his mouth and eyes. So we get the idea that you can bring a noble person low, but they're just going to rise up again because they are naturally above the common person. This completely contradicts what the Hag in the Wife of Bath's Tale, which we've read, says about nobility. For her, it is all about noble action. We have that. I think it's a reference to Seneca. We're dealing with the fire. Take that fire and close it up in a room, and as long as it has oxygen, it's going to burn. Open up the windows, the fire is going to act the same way. Why don't nobles act the same way behind closed doors as they do in front of everybody? If you are naturally something, you will be that way almost in an elemental way, like the fire, right? So which of these opinions is Chaucer's? He's got these two different characters voicing these opinions. He is kind of silent on the issue himself, right? But considering the wife is arguably a more important character than the knight, which is a controversial statement to make, but I'm going to make that statement. I think Chaucer's sensibilities probably would have been with the wife and not necessarily with the knight here. But this is an old noble fable. The idea that if a noble loses his land, loses his title, loses his situation, because he's naturally noble, he's going to rise up again because he's supposed to be um, elevated. So different tales for different audiences. Of course, we get to the Miller next, who is his tale is the antithesis of this tale in every respect. And I wish that we could go over that one, but it's a little it's a little racy. Okay, so we're transitioning to Palamon. So we kind of see how I'm going to use a modern term, and I'm going to say the lens, like in cinematography, turns from one character to another. Right? We have Arsita. We're going to have kind of a sketch of what he looks like, and then we're going to jump to Palamon. Later, we're going to jump to Theseus. Later, we're going to jump to Emily. This is how French romances are, and of course, this is how movies are made today. We just do it with images as opposed to text. Although, like, we could even argue whether there's a distinction between those two, but let's not get into that. Okay, 1451. In darkness and horrible and strong prison, the 7 year hath sat in Palamon, for pain, what for woe and for distress, who fareth double sore and heaviness, but Palamon that loved distraying so, that woo that of his wit he goeth for woe. Okay, a wood person is a person that's crazy or insane, and they get this right here in the translation. We saw this quite a bit in L'Amour to Arthur, the knight who is not able to get his love, or who is rejected because it hurts his worship, it hurts his identity. He ends up going crazy and crying at wells, and maybe living in the woods like a beast, depending on who the knight is. Right? The only knight who doesn't go out of his mind like this in a situation like this that I can recall. The whole loss of identity, woodman sort of situation, like we see in Mallory, is Gawain and Gawain and the Green Knight, when he goes back to Camelot after the whole problem with the sash, right? And his whole identity crisis. He basically has to suck it up and still be Gawain, um, even though if we read a lot of other romances, we see Lancelot, for example, losing his mind for years and like living in the woods, and the same thing happens to Ewain, or Yvain, if you like the French version of his name. Anyway, this is a common romance trope, to have Palamon destroyed by love and going crazy, and I think we can relate to this if we are honest with ourselves. I think that we always, in modern times, try to play it up like love doesn't affect us this much, but maybe behind closed doors it still does. Okay, 1457. On the egg thereto he is a prisoner, perpetually, not only for a year. Who could read in English properly his martyrdom? Forsooth it am not he. Therefore he pass as lightly as he may. As lightly as he may. Now let me get this right. As lightly as he may. Right. Middle English is still a little shaky. So we get the idea that it's terrible. Um, we've got it described just a little bit, but he's saying, "Oh, I can't describe it, so I'm going to pass over this." Here's more of your occupatio, right? If you guys are testing, please bring that up if they give you an excerpt and you're playing with an excerpt, and of course if it's relevant, right? Because this is a pretty important technique in this tale. Okay, 1462. So years, he's still in prison, right? Palamon's still in prison for years. In the meantime, you've got Arsita moving up the ranks of the nobility. He's kind of rebooted himself. He's starting over, and he gets to know Emily, obviously. Okay, 1462. It fell that in the 7th year of May, the third, the third knicht, as all the books say, that all the storytelling more plain, where it be aventure or destiny, as one a thing is sharpened it shall be, that soon after the midnight Palamon, be helping of a friend, broke his prison, and fleeth the city fast as he might go. For he had give his jailor drink so, of a clear made of certain wine, with narcotics and opium of thieves' fiend. There you go, guys. These are not new drugs, right? That all the nick, though that man would him shaka, the jailer slave he meek not the whack, and thus he flein as fast as ever he might. The dict was short and fast be the die,
That Nidus caused him with himself in Heda, and in a grove fastened there Besita, with dreadful foots then stalketh Palamon. So he breaks out. He doesn't really have a place to go. Like he's stuck in Athens, but he gives the jailer, along with the help of a friend, um, a narcotic drink with pure opium, and the guard is obviously out. So he's able to break out of prison. We get the idea that his body is probably more wasted than Arcita's, and they're going to get into a fight here pretty soon. Um, he's been in jail this whole time. I don't know if he's doing the prison cell push-up or whatnot, because Chaucer and the Knight don't give us any of this information. But we know that Arcita in that previous passage is doing all kinds of physical activity, so he's probably in pretty good shape. And it's the physical activity that lets everybody know that he is young and strong and noble, and he can get things done. So there's a connection between what they would call prowess, being strong of body and good in a fight, and nobility. Palamon, on the other hand, he's at a major disadvantage because he just broke out of jail, and I mean, who knows? Unless he is Uncle Irohing it in jail. I know my students will get that reference. Um, he probably is at a huge disadvantage when Arcita runs into him in a minute here. And of course, there's a little bit of coincidence going on here. We have to chalk up the coincidence to fate and the stars and astrology, and all that is going to come out in part three. The gods are at work here as well, and the gods are connected in medieval astrology or astronomy to the planets and the stars, the different spheres. We're going to have a little bit of an assignment on this for part three. Okay. Um, 1480. For shortly this was his opinion, that in that grove he would him heed all die, and in the night then would he take his way to Thebes ward his friends for to pray, on Theseus to help him to weary, and on shortly other he will lose his life, or winning Emily unto his wife, will lose his leaf, or winning Emily unto his wife. Thus is the effect and his intended plain. Okay, so his plan is to um, get to Thebes and do what he thought that Arcita should have done from the beginning: get an army together and go war against Theseus. Keep in mind, a minute ago he was a woodman. Warring against Theseus, probably not a good idea. Nobody beats Theseus, and he's older at this point, but he's not an old man yet. Like, he's probably in his 40s or 50s. Um, Theseus is nowhere near decline, and of course, Athens is the biggest city state in Greece, and Theseus is ruling it. He's probably got the best army, unless you want to bring the Spartans into it, who are not referenced here at all. So making war on Theseus is not the best idea, and that's not how it's going to go anyway. This is kind of a pipe dream for Palamon right here. He's a desperate man. He's a woodman, right? Okay, 1488. The woolly turned to Arcita again, that little wist now he that was his cara, till that fortune had brought him in that snara. Okay, here we're blaming the goddess Fortune again, right? Fortune, who holds you high and then drops you. Okay, we also see some of the interlaced format going on here, because now we're turning, like the Wheel of Fortune, we're turning the page to Arcita. So we get to see Arcita approach Palamon and find him in this state, and he hasn't seen him from what we, unless he's peeking in on him, right? From what we've seen here in the text in years, right? And again, they're cousins. They had sworn a blood oath. They had this falling out when Palamon saw the girl first, and Arcita is like, "Hey, I don't care. I love her better than you. I'm going to get the girl." Of course, as modern people, we might ask, why hasn't Arcita worked his magic on Emily yet? Well, he's only a squire. It took him this long to get up to be a squire. Emily is the sister of a queen. He needs to at least be a knight in order to try to make a marriage like this. And he's not going for love paramours like we talked about with the wife of Bath. Um, he seems to want to marry Emily and live happily ever after. And this is much more like one of Chrétien's romances where marriage can actually work than some of the French romances and the English copies of the French romances that came later. Okay, 1491. The busy lark, messenger of Di, salueth in her song the morrow gry, and fiery Phoebus riseth up so breet, that all the Orient laugheth o' the leet, and with his stream is dreeing in the graves, the silver drops hanging on the leaves, and Arcita that in the court riol, with Theseus his principal square, is reasoning looketh on the merry day, and for to don his observance to May, remembering on the point of his desire, notice it's May again, hey on the courser, startling as the fear, is reading into the fields him to play, out of the court, were it a meal or tway, and to the grove of which that Eo told, by aventure his way he gan to hold, to market him a garland of the graves, were it of woodbine and hawthorn leaves. And Lord, he song again the sun sheen, My, with all thy flowers and thy grain, welcome be thou, far, fresh May, in hope is some grain get the May. And from his courser with a lusty heart, into the grove will hastily he start, on in a path he roameth up and down, there as be a venture, this Palamon was in a bush, that no man might him say, for sore afeard of his dread was he, though thing he knew that he it was Arcita, God wot he would have trod it full later, but sooth says, go see the many years, the field hath iron and the wood hath ears, it is fair a man to bear him even, for all day mateth him at unset steven. For little wood Arcita of his fellow, that was so near to hearken all his sorrow, for in the bush he sitteth now for still. When that Arcita hath roamed all his fill, and sungeth all the roundel lustily, into a study he fell suddenly, as doon these lovers in hill quaint gills, now in the crop, now down in the briers, now up, now down, as bucket in a well, reeked as the free day, soothly for to tell, now it sheeneth, now it raineth faster, reeked so can Gary Venus overcaster, the heights of her folk reet as he'll die, is galeful right so changes she awry. Said it is the free day, all the willock illick, when that Arcita had sung, he gan to sick, and set him down withouten any more. Alas, quoth he, that day that he was bore, how long, Juno, through thy cruelty, wilt thou weary Thebes the city? Alas, he brought this to confusion, the blood real of Cadme and Amphion, of Cadamus, which that was the first mound of Thebes built, or the first town began, and of the city first was crowned king, of his lineage arm his offspring, be very ligny as of stock real, and now I am so cateth and so thrall, that he that is me mortal enemy, I serve him as his squire poverly, and yet doeth Juno me well more shame, for I doth be know min own name, but there as I was wont to hide Arcita, now hide I Philostrata, not worth a meat. Alas, thou fellow Mars, alas, Juno, thus hath your ill or lineage all fordo, save only me the wretched Palamon, that Theseus mettereth in prison, and over all this to slayin me outreatly, love hath his fiery darts so brilliantly, ye stick through my throat, careful heart, that shapen was me death, erst than me sharte. Ye slain me with your iron, Emily, ye be in the cause wherefore that ye die, of all the remnant of mine other car, and he set in not the mountains of a tar, so that he could not outdo your presence. And with that word he fell down in a trance, a long time, and after he upstairt. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Um, First of all, we have Arcita referencing the lineage from Statius's Thebaid, which was the source for Boccaccio's Tessida, which was the source for Chaucer's Knight's Tale. So we kind of have a genealogy here demonstrating Arcita's nobility. He's blaming different gods that reference different things. His name Philostrata is is a joke as well. We can get more into this in Zoom, and I can probably post some research about this. Yeah, we don't have time, unfortunately, to hit every illusion here. Cadme, Amphion, and Cadmus. Again, these are Theban figures. some of these we'd actually run into in Ovid as well. So we have to know our Greek mythology a little bit here to kind of get some of his references. Um, the other thing that's going on is it's May again. May is when they saw the girl, and of course he's going out a Maying. This is not something that was going on in ancient Greece. This is a medieval thing that is the commoners practiced it as well. They had their May Day festivals, but the nobles were the ones that swore loyalty to either the leaf or the flower, and they had these elaborate festivals where they would dress up and court each other, and um, a lot of it was supposedly innocent flirtation, but there was a lot more symbolically going on there. Whereas they allegedly tried to keep it symbolic, whereas the commoners, their May festivals, which were about fertility and love and growing things, were a little bit wilder, supposedly. Um, of course, where it gets really interesting is the May festivals probably go back to um, Celtic practices, right? And here we're seeing Celtic practices that have been kind of sterilized by Christians in the Middle Ages, being applied to a ancient Greek romance that is being um, contemporized or medievalized, right? Contemporized for the time. So there's all kinds of anachronism going on in this text, and um, it's really kind of delightful anachronism if you get it. We are also back to that extra bit and theory of vision where we have Emily slaying Arcita with her eyes, right? And that happened way back in prison. The other thing that we have going on, of course, is Fortune's wheel, right? We have the idea that Arcita had it really bad when he fell off of Fortune's wheel, and he's still blaming Fortune and still saying that everything's bad for him because now he's got this fake name. He can't even be the knight that he is. He's having to work his way back up. It's so terrible. And then the person listening to all this while he's basically having his fit here is the guy who just broke out of prison. So that wheel turns at different rates for different people. And this is going to be really important later in the text because Arcita is on his way back up, as we can obviously see. The wheel is turning towards the apex. Palamon looks like maybe his wheel just started to turn back up. He's been crushed under his wheel for quite a bit longer, right? But I don't want to give away the ending, but let's just say the wheels turn at different rates for these two characters. They're kind of in the same place when they're found in that heap of bodies and they're put in prison together, and it's seeing this girl that starts their contention between each other. But once Arcita is released from prison, they really are on forking paths. So they go from being almost doppelganger characters at the beginning. You could throw one away, and the other one would basically fulfill all the same roles. To characters that are almost foils at this point, right? So it's interesting that that Fortune can separate family members who are so close, not only in blood and loyalty, but also in characterization, and can kind of spin them out like this, make them so different. So for me, and you can read this different ways, but for me, this lament that Arcita is getting into here almost comes across to me as comical because you've got Palamon who's got it so much worse, who's like right there in the bush next to him and didn't even recognize him. Um, but he recognizes him, of course, after he says his own name, very Odysseus-like, right? Okay, 1574. This Palamon that thought that through his heart he felt a cold sweat suddenly glide. He felt a cold sweat suddenly glide. That's a fun line. For ere he quoke, no longer would he be there, and one that he had heard Arcitas tale, as he were wooed with face dead in pallor, he stared him out of the bushes thicker, and said, Arsata, thou false traitor quicker, thou art thou hent, thou lovest me laddie so, for whom that ye have all this pain and woe, and art me blood, and to me counsel sworn, as ye have oft told thee here before, and hast bejabbed here Duke Theseus, that falsely charged hast thy name thus. E will be deed, or eres thou shalt die. Thou shalt not love me, laddie Emily, but e will thou hear only and no more, for e am Palamon, the mortal foe. And though I have no weapon in this, I've botched it. And though e have no weapon, I want to put that have in there. And though that e no weapon have in this plaza, but out of prison am a sturt be grassa, I dread not that other thou shalt dear, or thou ne shalt, or thou ne shalt, wow, I'm losing this here, 1594, or thou ne shalt not love an Emilia, cheese what thou wilt, or thou shalt not disterte. Okay, so this is the same song we heard when they originally are fighting over Emily, right? You're supposed to be my cousin. You're not acting the way that a man should act, and basically now you've also beguiled Theseus. And it's one thing to kill Theseus in plain battle because these guys are supposed to be medieval knights, right? It's another thing entirely to trick him and basically come into his court and act like you're somebody that you're not. This is not knightly behavior, at least according to Palamon. Interestingly, in medieval romances, we see knights in disguise all the time. One of the only knights who refuses to, except in the alliterative Mort Arthur, he refuses to disguise himself is Sir Gawain. Pretty frequently, he it says, "I will never fail to reveal my true name to somebody that asks." Um, but a lot of other knights travel in disguise. Lancelot does it a lot because he wants to go into tournaments and have people not know who he is so he can actually prove himself without his reputation getting in the way. Um, and there are younger knights that don't have worship or reputation yet that sometimes will go in disguise and people will be like, who is that person? Like Sir Gareth and Mallory, who basically changes color every few jousts because at this point he has a magic ring that's letting him do this, right? Um, so Palamon's argument is not about it's not about the idea that he disguises himself. I don't think so much as it's about the idea that he is for years at this point tricking this guy into thinking that he's somebody that he's not. This is a lot more underhanded than, oh, you can't tell who I am because I changed my coat of arms and I'm going to reveal everything after the tournament or after the fight is over. So I would agree with Palamon. This isn't knightly behavior in the way knights are portrayed in literature of the Middle Ages. It is pretty sneaky. It is more the kind of thing we would see from the Cult of Cupid and the Romance of the Rose, and that's where things kind of get twisted because courtly love or phenomore, if we want to call it phenomore, which is a broader category than courtly love at this point in literary criticism, basically allows for a lot of the Cult of Cupid stuff to make its way into to chivalry. So it's I think there's a reason the knight is the one that's bringing this up. We've got these two knights with these different ways of looking at love, and really their code of ethics is tied up in the way that they're wanting to love this woman differently. There's a lot more going on here at this point than just I saw her first, right? I hope that makes some sense. Okay, so basically he says, you're going to stop loving Emily, or I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to die trying, basically, right? As if Arsata could just shut it down like that. Like, it's been years he's been chasing this girl. Although you would think that he would, at some point at least try to pull the trigger and love her paramours as he's following her around as a servant like this. So, I hate this quarantine. Like, this would have been an interesting thing to discuss in class, but I think we're just going to have to move on. Okay, 1596. Uh, This Arsita with full dispiteous herte, when he him knew and had his tail herde, as fierce as Leon put out his sword and said thus, Be God that sit above her, near it that thou art seeking wood for lava, and eke that thou no weapon hast in this plaza, thou shouldest never out of this grove pass, that thou ne shouldest deign of me hand. For e defear, a servant of the bond, which that thou sayest that he sorry, which that thou sayest that he have mad to thee. What very fool, think well that love is free, and he would love her maugre all thee meet. But for as much as thou art worthy kneete, and willest to darne here by battle, have here by me troth, tomorrow he will not falle, without witting of any other wheat, that here he will be founden as a knechte, and bring in harness reet enough for thee, and choose the best and leave the worste for me, and meat and drink this knechte will he bring, enough for thee, and clothes for thee bedinge, and if so be that thou, me lady, winna, and slay me in this wood therein I inna, thou mayest well have thee lady as for me. Okay, so Arsita, who is the more warlike of the two, and that's going to definitely shake itself out in the third part and the fourth part. He basically says, "Hey, um, I'd kill you right now. You don't have a sword. We're going to fight over her, but this is going to be fair and honorable. You're saying that I'm not an honorable man. You're saying that I'm not an honorable knight. Guess what? I'm going to bring you some armor. And you're going to pick between my suit and your suit, whatever is the best. You're going to take the best. And I'm also going to feed you. And this would probably be important because he's been wasting away in jail and he doesn't have his strength. This isn't going to bring him up to the level of health that Arsita is, however, which is why Arsita seems to be wanting to give him the better suit of armor. This would also be a courtesy thing anyway, even if he was in good health. But the idea here is words are pointless. Let's fight over her. Trial by combat, of course, is an important. It's an important activity in the Middle Ages. It was used for judicial reasons. Obviously, not in this text because what happens does not make Theseus happy when he shows up. But there's also the idea that God would favor the winner of the fight. Like God doesn't care about strength or feats at arms when it comes down to trial by combat. It was all about who was right. If the person was right, they were going to win, and if they were wrong, they were going to lose. And in this way, of course, we can imagine a lot of people were kind of bullied into doing what the stronger people wanted, right? That's the reality of it. But this is a romance, so of course we're going to romanticize these elements, right? Okay, and I could go on about trial by combat, and you've all heard about this anyway. Um, so they're kind of making it a trial by combat for love. Um, this is not, by the way, how women generally choose their mate, and we're going to see that when Emily finally gets to say something in this text. You'll notice we're quite a bit into it, and we haven't heard what she thinks at all yet, and we will get to hear that. But ultimately, it's not going to matter um, that much what she thinks, and it's kind of sad. And the wife obviously will have something to say about that later. Okay, 1620. Um, These Palamon and sweared, he granted they, and thus they been departed till the morrow, when each of him had laid his faith to borrow. O Cupid, out of all charity, O reign, that would no fellow have with thee, full sooth is said, that no nay lordship, full note his thanks have no fellowship. Well fiend in that Arcita and Palamon. Arcity is reading and known unto the tone, and on the morrow ere it were days leaked, full privily to harness had he deet, both sufficient and made to Darren? Both sufficient and made to Darren? That's a word I have not run into often. Both sufficient and suitable to decide. Okay. The battle in the field betwixt him twain, and on his horse alone as he was born, he carried all the harness him before, and in the grove at team and place he set, this Arcita and this Palamon been met, to change and gown the colour in her face, right as the hunters in the Rhine of Thrasa, that stunden at the gata with the spear, who hunted is the lion or the bear, and heareth him come rushing in the graves, and breaketh both boas and levers, and thinketh, here comes me mortal enemy, without fail, he mote be dead or for other he mote slain him in the gap, or he may slay me if that me mishapa. So fared they in changing of her hue, as far as everich of him other canoe. There last no good day, ne no saluing, but straight without an word or rehearsing, everich of him helped to for to arm an other, as friendly as he were his own brother. And after that with sharp spears stronger, they foyen each other a wonder long. Thou meekest ween that this Palamon in his feeting were a wood leon, and as a cruel tigre was Arcita, as wild boars gone they to smite, that frothen with his foam for eerie wood, up to the uncle fought they in her blood, and in this wees it let him fighting dwell, and forth the will of Theseus you'd tell. So this is the part that the assignment is over. There's another spot where we see the two of them going at it like this as well. This is brief. We're using stock descriptions. He's a crazy lion, a mad lion. He's a cruel tiger. These are very, very common stock descriptions in romances. Um, we've got them foining or thrusting at each other with sharp spears. We don't have a really good description of what their armor looks like. They obviously are going at it on foot, which is not something that medieval knights would do with spears that often. They would be on horseback. But if we go back to the idea that these are supposed to be ancient Greeks, obviously they fought on spear. I can't even talk. They fought on foot with spear a lot. It was part of their military strategy, and they used bigger shields, and their armor was less of a big deal than the armor of the medieval knight. They had armor, but it wasn't like cap a pie, like Hamlet's father's ghost, right? Like head to toe armor. And again, we could get into armor all day. And obviously, we brought some into class and played with it. But this was also the scene that we filmed a little bit of. We medievalized it. We went with 14th century armor, found a grove, armored each other up, and tried to make a little video out of this. So we'll see how that shakes out with the quarantine and everything going on. But so anyway, this is a very, very brief section. There's almost no description. We don't get to see who really is even winning here. They're going at each other a long time. The only they've almost lost their humanity, right? They're lions, they're tigers, they're wild boars. Of course, once we get into the boar, we get into some subtext of hunting, which we're going to see in a minute here. Boar hunting was a sport that medieval knights enjoyed quite a bit, and this is something that actually we see it in ancient texts too. Odysseus has a scar from a boar that's an identifying mark. So this might actually fuse the old and the contemporary for the poet of the 14th century anyway, and for us it's the old and the old, right? We don't hunt boars so much anymore. Um, but we see this kind of loss of humanity as they're going at it, and then they fought up to the ankle in their blood. What this actually means, based on some research that I did, and this kind of breaks um, our ancient context, because this was something that actually would happen in armor of the 13th and 14th century. It's not that the field is covered in blood and they're just bleeding all over the place and it's like Mortal Kombat and we've just completely hyperbolized this. They're wounded in the leg, or in the hip, like someplace where the blood is going to trickle down, and their armored feet, like either sabatons or solerettes, um, are basically getting filled up with blood. So their shoes under the armor, and then the armor themselves that sits on top of the shoe, which has the effect of being able to be filled because the shoe is there, making it so the blood can't drain out. They basically the top of the piece of armor would look like a bowl, where it's in contact with the ankle, and it's filled at this point with a blood that has trickled down the leg. So this is not an ancient description that works. This is a medieval description, and this is not. It's probably not a hyperbolic description where their guts are all over the floor and they're still fighting. It probably has to do with the way the armor is functioning. And when we get into the third part and the fourth part, where we actually see a lot more battle going on at the tournament, and we get to see what the armor looks like. Chaucer basically says the old styles are the new styles, and he even brings in things like Prussian shields and morning stars. I mean, it's not it's not ancient weaponry here on 1660 and 1661, but they are fighting with spears on foot, just a little bit above. Um, so this is not Chaucer's area, right? This is not his area of focus. Your assignment for this particular event is to go into plan book and take a look at either the duel from the Iliad or the duel from or one of the duels from Mallory. One of the duels from the Iliad, in fact. I chose Gawain and Lancelot and Hector and Achilles, which are famous fight scenes between contentious men. Um, and we've got a medieval example and we've got an ancient example, right? That's kind of what I was going for. And I wanted you guys to kind of look at how this is being done and look at how those are being done and make some comparisons. And maybe we'll start to understand where I'm coming from with Chaucer's style here and what he's choosing to focus on, and maybe what Chaucer thinks about violence. Um, Again, when they get into the tournament scene later in this text in Knight's Tale, Chaucer does a lot more describing of the action, and he actually gets into an alliterative style, more similar but not all the way there to what we saw in Gawain and the Green Knight. So there is like this English alliterative style that kind of predates what Chaucer is doing, which goes obviously all the way back to texts like Beowulf, right? Um, he seems to be trying to implement some of that in the actual tournament scene. But here we've got these guys fighting and just kind of losing their humanity and becoming like the kinds of animals that Theseus would hunt. They don't have their coats of arms. They don't have crests on their helmets. Like, we're not focusing on any of this stuff. This is whatever armor he could grab, and they're just having a fight in the woods, and nobody is supposed to know about it. This is not highly stylized, romantic fighting, although it is borrowing some of the romance conventions for these dehumanizations. So that should get you started on your assignment anyway. There's obviously more that you guys can pull from those other two texts. And I ask that you look at one or the other, but if you want to look at all three, go nuts. I just gave you short excerpts anyway, and I know that some of you guys are really into this stuff, and some of you guys not so much. So, okay, 1663. Yeah, okay, so again, interlaced format, we move to Theseus. Theseus is going to discover them fighting. We're going to spend a lot more time with Theseus than we are with this fight. He's gone hunting. Again, this is a dignified thing in this time that knights would do. And what these guys are doing, slugging it out in the bush here, not so dignified. So a little bit of juxtaposition. 1663. The destiny minister general that executeth in the world over all, the purveyance that God hath him beforn, so strong it is that though the world hath sworn the contrary of a thing, be ye or nay, that yet sometime it shall fallen on a die, that falleth not eft within 1,000 year. For certainly our appetite is here, be it of wear or pace or hate or love, all is this ruled by the seat above. This mean I now by mighty Theseus, that for to hunten is so desirous, and namely at the great heart and mind, that in his bed there doeth him no die, that he is clad and ready for to read, with hunt and horn and hounds him beside. For in his hunting hath he switch delight, that it is all his joy and appetite, to be in himself the great heart's bond, and after Mars he serveth now Diana. So Diana, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, she's going to actually be important later as well. The major gods that are playing here, even though Juno keeps getting brought up, are Saturn, Diana, and Venus and Mars. And we will see how they directly affect the outcome of the story. Okay, 1683. Clear was the die, as I have told her this, and Theseus with all joy and bliss, with his Hippolyta the fair Aquena, and Emily clothed all in grana, on hunting be they ridden royally, unto the grove that stood full fast to be, in which there was an heart, as men him tolda, doth Theseus the straightway hath holda. And to the dawn he readeth him full richte, for thither was the heart wont have his fleete, and over a brook, and so forth on his way. This Duke Wolham a course at him or tway, with Hans which as that him least commanda. With Hans which as that him least command. So with the sorts of hounds that he desired or liked to command. Yeah, that's basically what they're saying too. Okay, 1696. On one the Duke was come unto the land, under the sun he looketh and anon, he was war of Arcita and Palamon, that fought bram as it were boars too. So we're back to the idea that they're animals, right? Get a little bit of a description that seems more romantic for a second here before this fight gets broken up, but that's about it. The bricked swords went unto and fro so hideously that with the layest stroke it seemed as it would fell an oak. But what they were, no thing ne he wot. This Duke his courser with his spur smoot, and in a hurt he was betwixt them two, and pulled out the sword and cried, Ho! No more, a pain of leasing of your head. By mighty Mars, he shall noon be dead that smiteth every stroke that ye may send. But telleth me what Mr. men ye been, that been so hearty for to fight in here without judge or other officer, as it were in a list royally. So the problem here, this is an illegal fight because we don't have a marshal. It's not happening in the lists. We don't have some kind of a judge. It's not technically a trial by combat that is legal. This is a brawl in the woods, and in doing so, they've kind of broken the law of his land. And depending on whose laws we're dealing with, there are places in the Middle Ages where what they're doing is totally legal, and there are places where it's completely illegal. So Theseus jumping in kind of gives us that context here, right? 1714. This Palamon answered hastily and said, Sire, what needest word is more? We have the death deserved both two. Two woeful wretches been we, two captives, that been encumbered of our own leavers, that been encumbered of our own leavers. And as thou art a rightful lord and judge, ne give us neither mercy ne refuge, but slay me first for santa charity. But slay me, fellow, eke as well as me, or slay him first, for though thou knowest it later, this is thy mortal foe, this is Arcita, that for thy land is banished on his head, from which he hath deserved to be dead, for this is he that come unto thy gata, and said that he was hight Philostrata. Thus hath he jabbed thee full many a year, and thou hast marked him thy chief square, and this is he that loveth Emilia, for sith the day is come that he shall dare, I mak plainly me confession that I am filke woeful Palamon, that hath thy prison broken wickedly. I am thy mortal foe, and it am I, that loveth so hot the Emily the Brickter, that I will die present in her sita, wherefore I ask death and me Joisa, but slay me fellow in the same wisa, for both hand we deserved to be slain. So, I am your mortal foe. I am Palamon, and you should kill me, because it's right that you should kill me because I've broken the law. And I'm fine dying in front of Emily, who I'm in love with. But by the way, this is Arcita over here, and you know what? Actually, kill him first because he's the one that beguiled you for years to get close to this girl that I saw first. You know, so his noble. I find it comical. His noble speech is kind of broken by his desire to see see Arcita punished as well, and maybe Arcita punished first because Arcita has not only betrayed Theseus, he's also betrayed him. So Arcita is kind of getting the short end of the stick when it comes to being called a traitor here, right? He's a traitor to Palamon. He's a traitor to Theseus because he's given his word and he's broken it. Whereas Palamon has never given his word and broken it, and his life has been arguably a lot worse than Arcita's because of this. And you know, at this point, maybe he's a little suicidal. Theseus does not want to kill these guys. They've shown their love in knightly combat. This is a knightly thing to do, even if it is a brawl in the woods. But Theseus is kind of stuck because he also has to administer the laws and be a judge. And we talked about this in video 1. What Theseus needs is an intercession. We need female intercession to come in here, and then he's allowed to be a little bit softer and he can blame the women for showing his feminine side, and he can give these guys clemency. We saw this in part one of Knight's Tale with the women lamenting at the temple of Clement and causing Theseus to go to war against Thebes. We also see this again in the Knight's Tale, where the knight is or the Knight's Tale, and the wife of Bath's Tale, easy to mix up, um, where the knight and the wife of Bath's Tale is going to be executed for his crimes, and the women step in and they lament, and Guinevere is given the ability to judge him instead of Arthur, and they come up with this quest where he has to find out what all women want as opposed to being executed. So we see that the quote unquote softer sex, and don't quote me on that, that's not me, basically um, allows for mercy, allows these men to act mercifully, but to not have to act as if they are weak. So there's definitely some male toxicity going on there, but we see how the role of woman can kind of soften that, and how it forms kind of a symbiotic relationship, maybe only in that way, because obviously in the Middle Ages women are terribly oppressed. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a role that they can play in making society go, right? Um, yeah, I think I've made my point. Okay, 1742. This worthy duke answered none again, and said, "This is a short conclusion. Your own mouth by your confession hath damned you, and it will it record, it needeth not to pain you with the cord, ye shall be dead by Michty Mars the Reed." Okay, so he pronounces this thing, he makes a big show of it. Grr, manly words, right? Okay, but then the women come in and kind of straighten him up here. 1748. The queen anon for very woman heather gan for to weep, and so did Emily, and all the ladies in the company. Great pity was it, as it thought him all, that ever switch a chance should fall, for gentlemen that they were greatest at, and no thing but for love was this debate, start debate, and sought her bloody wounds weed and sore, and all a crying, both lass and more, "Have mercy, Lord, upon us women alla," and on her bare knees adown they falla, and would have kissed her feet there as he stood, till at the last a slacked was his mood, for pity runneth soon in gentle hearte, and though he first for ear a quoque and starter, he hath considered shortly in a clause the trespass of him both and eke the cause, and although that his ear he'll guilt accused, yet in his reason he him both excused, as thus: he thought well that every man will help himself in love if that he can, and eke deliver himself out of prison. And eke his heart had compassion of women, for they weepen ever and anon, and in his gentle heart he thought anon, and soft unto himself he said, "Fie upon a word that will have no mercy, fie upon a lord, fie upon a lord that will have no mercy. But being a leon, both in word and deed, to him that being in repentance and dread, as well as to proud dispiteous man, that will maintain that he first began, that Lord hath little of discretion, that in switch case can no division, but willeth prede and humbless after own. On shortly when his ear is less agone, he gone to looketh up with eye and lite, and gone these same words all on heate. So he goes through this process where he's mad, but then he thinks about love, and then everything is cool, and he pronounces this completely different judgment. The reason that critics think that there's not a real mental process going on here, other than we have this these parallel events where we've got these women's lamentations that basically make him change his mind. The way that he constructs the list for this tournament that he's about to set up, and the kind of judgment that he gives after these lamentations, kind of demonstrate that this is kind of what he wanted to do the whole time, right? He sets up this elaborate spectacle for all of these people to see. He builds these shrines. Part three gets into it. If this is a snap decision and he really doesn't want to make it, it's a little unbelievable that he would go so far to make such a spectacle of the whole thing. Um, but there are probably critics that see it as a snap decision. I think I agree with the ones that don't. I think that he basically just needs Hippolyta and Emily and these ladies to make their lamentations so that he can do what he was going to do to begin with, and again, not have to be called weak. Okay, 1785. The God of love, our benedicite, how meekty and how great a Lord is he. Against his might there gaineth none obstacles. He may be claimed a God for his miracles, for he can marketh at his own guise of ever its kirt that him list devise. For here this Arcita and this Parlement that quickly weren out of my prison, and meek have lived in Thebes royally, am within I am her mortal enemy, and that here death leath in my might also, and yet hath love maugre here Ian too, brought him hither both for to dia. Now looketh, is not that a high folly? But who may been a fool but if he love? Behold it for God's sake that sit above, see how they blade. Be they not well aright? Thus hath her Lord, the God of love, ypad, her wages and her fees for her service, and yet they weeden for to bin full wiese that servant love for aught that may befalle, but this is yet the beste game of alle, for she for whom they han this jollity can him therefore as much thank as may. She would no more of all this hot fara, by God, than what a cock or a hara. Okay, Emily has no idea this was going on. They're going to kill each other over her, and she has no clue, right? She doesn't really know these guys, and it's been years. Um, he's of course talking about the power of love, but there's a little bit of satire here, I think, and this goes back to the Romance of the Rose and the cult of love. And there are many ways to read that, and one of the principal ways to read that is a satire, especially the second part, which is 80% of it. Okay, 1811. But all might been a said hot and cold, a man might been a fool, or young or old. It would it be myself for young ago, for in me team a servant was I own. Okay, so he used to be a servant of love when he was young. He's gotten older, he's gotten wiser, and he knows better than to serve the god of love at this point. But he used to be part of Cupid's cult. This would be an interesting thing for Hippolyta to hear, his wife, who is standing right here, who he conquered in battle and brought back to Athens from her island, along with her sister. And maybe it's this kind of attitude towards her that inspires such stories between them as we see in Midsummer Night's Dream, where he first wins her by beating her up, and uh, he kind of wants to win her for real throughout the entire comedy, and he eventually is able to do it by acting like the right kind of judge and the right kind of lord and others love. She's able to see that he's actually a decent guy. Um, I can't prove without doing some research that Shakespeare drew some ideas directly from this, but I definitely see some similarities and maybe some inspiration potential, right? Okay, 1815. On therefore seen I know of love's pain, and would here sore I can the man distrain, as he that hath been caught oft in his lass, you'll forgive I'll wholly this trespass, at request of the queen that kneeleth here, and eke of Emily me sister dear, and ye shall both anon unto me swear, that never more ye shall me country dare, ne make war upon me nick ne day, but being me friends in all that ye may, you'll forgive this trespass every del, and they him sworn his asking fair and well, and him of courtship and of mercy prayed, and he him granteth grace, and thus he said. Okay, so that happened very quickly, and we're right back into dialogue. But one of his demands, of course, is you can't make war on me if I'm going to spare you. You actually have to if not serve me in a vassal sort of way, you at least need to be my friend and not my foe, right? I mean, that's the least that he could expect. And of course, they swear loyalty to him right away because they don't want to die and because he's actually going to do them a good turn here, right? Um, so we were talking about the turning of fortune's wheel and how it turns at different rates. Um, it looks like Palamon sped up to catch up with Arsaces, right? Because this great lord is now pronouncing that they're going to basically have this fair tournament over this girl, and that's going to decide everything. Um, But just because their places on the wheel are intersecting doesn't mean that they are not still turning at different rates. Okay, keep that in mind. If they turned at the same rate for the rest of the text, we wouldn't have a clear winner here. Okay. And fortune works in weird ways. Like Theseus is like, hey, let's have a battle over this. The guy who wins the fight, the girl has to go with him, and she would go with him naturally anyway, right? Yeah, right. Um, but fortune and the gods are going to work differently than this. Okay, they still have a part to play. There's a reason this is 4 parts. It would be almost done if Theseus knew how to make everything work out. And Theseus has also said, oh, young people are the ones that worship love. We're going to see that love is actually pretty powerful and there's nothing satirical about it, regardless of what Theseus thinks right here. Okay, 1829. To speak of royal lineage and riches, though that she were queen or a princess, richessa, let's get this right. To speak of royal lineage and richessa, though that she were a queen or a princess, each of you both is worthy doubtless to wenden that one team is, but natheless, I speak as for my sister Emily, for whom ye have this strife and jealousy, ye wot yourself she may not wed in woe. Attons, though ye feeten evermore, that one of you, all be him luth or lief, he mote go peepen in an ivy leaf. That is to say, she may not now han both, all be ye never so jealous ne so wroth, and fourthly ye you'll put in this degree, that each of you shall have in his destiny, as him is sharp and hearken in what we say, lo here your end of that ye shall devise. Mi will is this, for plat conclusion, without any replication, if that you like it, take it for the best, that everych of you shall go and wear him lester, freely, without ransom or danger, and this day 50 weeks fair or near, everych of you shall bring 100 knights, armed for listis, up in all rites, all ready for daring here by battle, on this behoot you without falle upon me truth, and as I am a knichte, that whether of you both that have meete, this is to say, that whether he or thou may with his 100, as I spak of now, slain his country, or out of list drive, then shall I yive Emilia to weave, to whom that fortune yive so far across. The list shall I maken in this place, on God so wisely on me soul rue, as I shall even judge bin in true. Ye shall none other ende with me maken, that one of you ne shall be dead or taken, and if you thinketh this is weel ye said, saith your avis and holden you apart. This is your end and your conclusion. Who looketh likely now but Palamon? Who springeth up for joy but Arcita? Who couldeth tell? Who couldeth it indeed? That joy that is marked in the plaza when Thasius hath done so far a grassa, but doon on knees with every manner weak, and thanked him with all her heart and meekte, and namely the Thebans often seethe. And thus with good hope and with heart blithe, they taken her leave, and homeward going they rede to Thebes with his own wireless weed. Okay, and this ends. Explicit segunda pars. This ends the second part. So he sets up this tournament. They each get 100 knights. The rules are basically that if one of them dies in the tournament or is drawn out of the tournament off the field, the other one is going to be in an arranged marriage with Emily. So this is ultimately the way that Theseus thinks that the thing is going to be resolved. You'll notice he said he speaks for his sister Emily, his sister-in-law really Emily, but that's how he's saying it. And he is basically going to make the marriage happen with whoever wins. So we've talked about arranged marriages. We've seen arranged marriages. What we're going to see in part 3 is Emily going to the goddess Diana and basically saying, hey, I'm actually not into either one of these guys. Could I please just be a nun? And Diana basically says, no, when you've got two noble men who are fighting over you, one of them is going to win because the gods are going to make one of them win. We have Arcita, just a little preview, going to the shrine of Mars or Ares and praying for victory in battle. We have Palamon going to the shrine of Venus and praying for victory in love. And then we have Saturn, who you guys probably know better as Kronos, who interferes with the whole process on top of this. And we're not only using Greco-Roman mythology when Saturn breaks in and interferes. We're also using medieval astronomy slash astrology, and there's quite a bit about that in part three, and that's where the assignment for part three is going to go. Um, Chaucer, it looks like, um, and I might have needed some correction on the Wife of Bath's prologue. Um, Chaucer, it looks like, was actually kind of a devotee of astrology and cosmology. He wrote for his son Lewis, who is actually a child out of wedlock. We're pretty sure. Um, the treatise of the astrolabe, which is all about using an instrument to look at the stars and to basically tell through the stars what certain conditions were going to be like based on their astronomy um, on Earth. It was a pseudoscience that obviously doesn't shake out today, and there's lots of diagrams about this that you can still find online, actually. But we'll get into that more in that third part. But the gods are going to intervene. The planets are going to intervene. Um, Everybody is going to intervene. This is not just going to be a fight between two knights. Obviously, now we've got a battalion basically that's coming with each one, right, to decide victory. So it's not something that at this point can be decided based on the way that these two men are loving this same girl differently, if indeed they even are, or that might just be Arcita's kind of excuse, right, to not back up his cousin Palamon. So again, like I said at the end of the last recording, take sides. Is Palamon in the right? Is Arcita in the right? Are they both just a couple of lovesick fools? Would they have maybe fallen in love with somebody else if they weren't in prison for so long? Again, we'll set up a discussion board, and I want to know what you guys think. But this is about all the time I have for this today, and I hope this recording didn't end up being as long as the other one, but this is what we got to do for right now. So this is me signing off.